Very good evening to you and welcome to The Bottom Line, a wrap of the business news of the day. I'm Frances Hurd. And we start, as we often do, with the number of the day, which is a pretty obvious one today. The number of the day is 4 because Eskom has implemented stage 4 load shedding as cold and rainy weather gripped parts of the country today. It said earlier today it was moving from stage 2 to stage 4 cuts between 3 p.m. and 10 o'clock tonight due to exceptionally high demand while it battles breakdowns. Now, stage 4 load shedding means 4,000 megawatts of the grid is shed and most households will experience intermittent cuts of between 2 or 4 hours. Eskom says load shedding will persist into the weekend. As Criselda said, it continues to return broken generation units to service. Meanwhile, the power utility has told Parliament that load shedding will continue until December and could return in February or March next year. So the worst thing for our economy, the blackouts may be weakening the rand today. They have sparked concerns about South Africa's ability to shake off recession and come back from the financial crisis brought on by COVID-19. Eskom is considered by many, of course, to be one of South Africa's biggest economic risks. All right, let's look at other business news. Corruption, claims of corruption hampering government's efforts to disburse COVID-19 funds. And a report by the Auditor General, Kimi Makwetu, released today is damning. The report shows how IT systems used in government were not agile enough to respond to urgent challenges. Makwetu says his team found that the rapid disbursement of large sums of money increased the risk of fraud and corruption. Meanwhile, Employment and Labour Minister Thulas Nxesi has announced the suspension of the Unemployment Insurance Fund Commissioner, Teboho Marupeng. Let's take a look.
Kimi Makwetu says the report represents the first in a series of reports that will deal with the financial management of government's COVID-19 initiatives. He says audit teams found that the rapid implementation of the initiatives in already compromised control environments created significant risks. Processes, criteria, needs and controls were not well considered, and in the haste of implementation, mistakes were made and opportunities created for abuse. The AG reports that the IT systems used in government were not agile enough to respond to the changes required.
The poor record keeping has also been a feature in terms of this. You would almost think that if something was spent in the last 2 to 3 months, the people that were responsible for that expenditure will still remember where that particular record is. But there were many instances where the auditors got a runaround trying to figure out where is this particular document that supports a particular transaction. So those are some of the observations that we made as we were going through the scrutiny of these records, as well as the pre-existing inability to coordinate and oversee efforts that require and involve multiple departments and agencies. How does this show itself out? You'll see it in the findings. You go into SASSA, you send our electronic scrutiny tools to the database, and you are hoping that SASSA would have done that as a preliminary test to identify people that are being paid out of SASSA to check whether they have not also received, for example, UIF. These are the instances we are talking about, where one government department does not utilize the other available government databases to get assurance that they are not getting tripped with making payments that may not necessarily be due to some of those beneficiaries that have raised their hand. And therefore, the data analysis that we have done across all of these systems has pointed to us that there is still a prevalence of a high risk of fraud and abuse to these funds if the requisite steps are not taken. And that is why we believe that the multi-agency fusion center will become a very useful tool to get to the depths of these items, because as auditors, we do not have that necessary set of tools to achieve that particular objective.
Meanwhile, the Minister of Labour, Thulas Nxesi, has dropped a bombshell announcing the suspension of the UIF Commissioner Teboho Marupeng and his management team, including the Chief Financial Officer and the Chief Operation Officer. This after the Auditor General found that they failed to prevent UIF COVID TERS payment being made to pensioners, prisoners and dead people, among others.
When this occurred on his watch this morning, I suspended the UIF commissioner. I can see that some of the people decided to break the story even before I can announce it publicly. And I've appointed and designated Marsha Bronkhorst as an acting commissioner. Marsha is currently the COO of the department, but for now we're going to second her to the UIF. There's Marsha seated there. In a similar fashion, the DG of the Department of Labour and Employment has suspended the UIF management, the CFO, the COO, and the head of the supply chain.
COSATU says it welcomes the UIF suspensions and has accused the UIF management of incompetence bordering on corruption. Diabosito, SABC News, Johannesburg.
Some incredible revelations today. Now, tonight we're looking at some technological and online trends in the time of COVID-19. Worldwide Works, in partnership with F5, Dell, DigiCloud and Intel, has released a report on cloud computing in Africa. It says the COVID-19 pandemic has pushed cloud computing to the top of the minds of decision makers, 91% of respondents saying it's important. Earlier, it found that remote working because of COVID-19 and the lockdown had increased productivity across many companies in South Africa. To discuss, we're joined by the MD of Worldwide Works, Arthur Goldstack, via Skype. Thank you, Arthur. As always, it's pretty obvious that when people aren't physically in the office, cloud computing is more important. But can you give us sort of practical examples where companies are spending more and doing more specifically because of the pandemic?
Well, one of the key questions we asked was, how did the cloud assist you in coping with the crisis? Because that is really where the rubber hits the road in terms of a digital transformation, which is what we previously had researched. And 92% of respondents, and this is 400 companies across sub-Saharan Africa, 92% of companies said that it had assisted them with disaster recovery. Now, in the past, disaster recovery would have been if there's, for example, a flood or severe weather conditions that take down the power grid and the like. This time, disaster recovery was all about having to abandon the office but carry on working. And 92% were able to continue operating because of the cloud. And then 82%, another very high number, 82% said the cloud was what enabled them to continue operating through remote working. So those turned out to be the two key benefits of cloud computing. And in effect, the cloud is what saved the business world.
Yeah, because if you're downloading emails from work, if you're sharing data with colleagues, you're using the cloud. So were most African companies poised to go online?
Not all, but in fact, what we found was when we first did the study in 2013, only 50% of companies across Africa's key markets, and that was South Africa, Kenya, and Nigeria, had adopted cloud computing in some form or another. By 2018, when we did the study again, all companies that we surveyed were using the cloud. So the difference between 2018 and this year, when everyone is using the cloud continually, is that it has shifted from learning how to use it and moving beyond just backing up your data to actually using it for business efficiency, for operational effectiveness, and the like. So the one word that sums it up in 2020 is that the cloud has become strategic. In other words, business strategy is driven by the cloud, whereas in the past it was simply playing catch-up.
Now, earlier, Arthur, you did some research that was quite interesting, showing how remote working culture is changing things and has improved productivity for many. Firstly, do you think companies have been surprised at how effective it's actually been?
I think those companies that were digitally transformed were not surprised, because the whole purpose of digital transformation is to be ready for this kind of eventuality. We did a study with Cisco specifically to understand the extent to which digital transformation had enabled companies to cope with the crisis, and how corporate culture had perhaps been changed by remote working. And we found that those companies that were fully digitally transformed had a dramatically higher likelihood of having increased productivity compared to those that were still on the journey. So generally, most companies were on the journey to digital transformation. But those that were not all the way there, only 27% said they had increased productivity. Those that were fully digitally transformed, 71%. That's a massive gap. So the differentiator in terms of productivity definitely is digital transformation.
So what does digital transformation mean simply?
So people tend to talk about digitization as opposed to digitalization. So digitization is simply when you transfer your physical documents into digital documents, or let's say going from analog to digital. But that's not transformation. That is simply changing the format of what you're using. Digital transformation is where your processes become digital. And that is why they call that digitalization as opposed to digitization. But really, it's about processes all being digital and not just documents being digital. And that's essentially what we also see now in the cloud. And with regard to the Auditor General's report, one of the key findings there was that government systems were not agile enough. And in our cloud report released today, we found that one of the big benefits of cloud computing is agility of systems. So by embracing the cloud and digital transformation, one of the key dividends is that agility that is missing from government.
Yeah, and that's important. I mean, he was talking about comparing information across files, across government departments. It should be easy, you'd think, in this day and age. Finally, Arthur, this may be good for productivity, but what about people? There are concerns about burnout, about everyone sending too many emails, having too many Zoom meetings, scheduling those later because people are working from home. Just give me your opinion. Is there something as bad as too much productivity?
There definitely can be. It can be counterproductive if you are trying to monitor staff too closely. So the earlier study, in fact, pointed to the keys to success in remote working. And those included having good connectivity, and that you could call a hygiene factor, like having electricity and running water. But along with that were two important human elements. One was effective delegation of tasks. So if management was effective in delegating tasks and not necessarily monitoring the performance of those tasks, that is a key success factor. And the other was allowing people working from home to have some time during the day with their children or families. So in other words, work-life balance becomes more important when people are working remotely than when they are in the office. And businesses that take that into account have a more effective remote working team.
All right. I hope many are listening tonight. Fascinating research. Thank you, as always, the MD of Worldwide Works, Arthur Goldstuck. Now, let's focus on the property market for a minute. The property market is being forced to rethink ways of doing business under the so-called new normal. COVID-19 has ravaged the industry. Now it's time to build a path to recovery under a very strained economy.
Long-term stagnation in the South African economy has put pressure on the commercial property markets. Some businesses had to close doors as the uncertainty of the national lockdown took a toll on their finances. However, the sector has not been performing at its best pre-COVID-19. Pressure constrains the finances of existing rental tenants, therefore curtailing the ability to pay rent timelessly and absorb rental escalations.
We have seen a noticeably worse performance amongst retail tenants. They're dropping down into the 40%, whereas industrial and office space, the impact, although quite severe, was not as bad. I think this is a reflection of the the financial strength of retail tenants. I know retailers, a lot of them got shut down in their entirety, but so did manufacturers. So that should have played a role on industrial tenants. The fact that industrial tenants perhaps didn't perform as badly with their payments as retail tenants, financial strength of the tenant population that's probably weakest on the retail side of the big three property market sectors.
Tenants in rented properties were unable to make rent, and some landlords resorted to accepting moderate pay or risk losing it all.
In terms of commercial space, the guys, due to COVID, the tenants have found things extremely difficult and have requested rental decreases from their landlords, and there is more space becoming available.
The weak economic conditions have led to the tenant population being financially weak. Even with the interest rate cuts, businesses look to other ways of working out of the office. Nothando Makutulela, SABC News, Johannesburg.
All right, I can tell you the JSE was basically flat today, and the rand week after a very good run. Basically, manufacturing data in the United States looking good, and that has helped the dollar. So we are relatively weaker at the moment. And of course, the load shedding, our number of the day, not helping much. That's a wrap from me and the business team. That was the bottom line. Good night.
Right, time.